So much, Dr. La. Appreciate that opportunity. So there looks like there's a button here that I can press. Is that correct? Can we go to the next slide?
Amos, are you moving the slide?
Yes, she could do it from her end, but I can do that from here too on her behalf. So let me do that.
Okay.
Can you just start right at the top?
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Sorry, so here, okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. So today I'll try and be as quick as I can. There's lots of information and happy to talk to anybody about this afterwards in the next few days. So we started work on this sugary beverage taxation in 2010, motivated by the inclusion of sugary beverage taxation as a policy goal in our National Department of Health strategic plan for NCDs. And we did some early work on a systematic review of the evidence and simulated the potential of the impact of the policy using some mathematical modeling. Obviously, it made some assumptions, but I think the assumptions were based on a lot of work that was done, especially in Mexico and Brazil. The policy for a sugary beverage tax was formally proposed in 2016 by the National Treasury and introduced in 2018. And funding was provided to undertake a broad program of work, both for the sugary beverage tax itself, provided by IDRC, Canada, and subsequently some further funding to assess the impact of the introduction of the policy. Thanks. Next slide. I think there's a previous slide. Sorry, Amos. Previous to that? No, okay. So in South Africa, just to give you an idea, the obesity is skyrocketing, overweight is skyrocketing, and I think this is just to display what is probably coming to many countries in sub-Saharan Africa. I don't think anybody, any country will be exempt from this. And based on the last presentation, I just want to say that children that are malnourished, underweight, born with low birth weight are all much more prone to becoming obese. So this is a joint epidemic of both malnutrition and obesity. I am going to focus largely on the obesity today. Thank you. Next slide. This is happening not only in adults, but also in children. Next slide. And the fact is that this is an epidemic, quote unquote, that is not being shared by a microbe, but is provided courtesy of commercial determinants and largely by industry, which is targeting the lowest socioeconomic groups actually across the continent, certainly in South Africa, but across the continent. Because as far as they're concerned, this is a growth market because a lot of people in the global north have already decided that sugary beverages are not healthy. So they've decided that they can make more profit in our continent, on our continent. Thank you. Next slide. I just want to say that having a sugary beverage tax and passing a sugary beverage tax is not just about evidence. Obviously, we had at the time good evidence. We had produced research evidence in South Africa using South African data and for South African policymakers. But I just want to point out that there were several things that were not in our favor. The unemployment rate, which was 27% back then, is now around 50% since COVID. We did have a history of excise taxation of tobacco and alcohol. That was useful because the government knew that they could do this kind of thing. In general, across the continent, not just in South Africa, we have low advertising costs and very weak regulation. and the market for sugary beverages has doubled in the last 2 decades. There is generally a lack of policy coherence between public health goals and economic growth, and I think we all face that particular problem. As I said, industry is shifting its focus to emerging economies, and 50% of soft drinks and particularly processed snack food imports into 16 of the SADC countries originates in South Africa. So this is something that, I mean, Coca-Cola certainly have bottling plants, I think in at least 2 or 3 countries on our continent. Next slide. These are the kinds of arguments that we saw when we wanted to introduce the tax. This was even before the tax was passed. There was a lot of discussion about unemployment, how the tax could cause a loss of jobs. It was way out of proportion, way out of proportion. And this is standard stuff that happens. So if any countries are considering that, you should know that that's what's going to happen. There's always going to be a proposal industry. There should be a partnership between government and industry. Our experience is it never works out. And they try and deflect the issues and say the largest contributors are the rise in energy intake have been other calorie-rich foods. It's not about sugary beverages. The fact is that liquid sugar in these sugary beverages is just the worst possible thing. It is one of many policies that is needed. I don't want to minimize it. And let me just say that front of pack labeling, as well as stopping marketing to children, which is not so simple, is really critical, but the tax is a first step. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but just to tell you, it was a real process. It didn't happen immediately. There was a long and involved discussions, the research, the peer-reviewed publications, the public comment, the industry review, the refuting of the job claims, then lots of public hearings, interference by industry, and finally a presidential sign-off. And that all took at least 5 years from the time that the research began, and at least 6 or 7 years from the time that we actually applied for the grant to IDRC to fund this work. Okay, next slide. Thanks. The fact is that the public over time does support the tax. This is just to give you an idea. Right at the beginning of the work, about 55% of the public in South Africa supported it. And then by the time that the tax was about to be introduced, it was closer to 75%. So it was a 20% increase. The public are an important constituency. Let's not forget about them. Okay, next slide. And just to give you an idea, we modeled our sugary beverage tax on a 20% tax. And actually the Treasury was very happy with that. But then industry came along and said, no, you can't do that. You must do it in a different way. And basically, I hate to use this word, but the tax was watered down to 10%, from a 20% to a 12% tax. Based on the sugar content. The first 4 grams, which is 1 gram of sugar, 1 teaspoon of sugar, was exempt. So then that was the way that they did that. Okay, next slide. So it was called the Health Promotion Levy in South Africa, and included things like syrups and concentrates made with or without fruit juice, cocoa powder, non-alcoholic waters with sugar or flavoring, and non-alcoholic beer. And excluded were dairy products with added sugar, juices, 100% fruit juice. And let me just say, a lot of people, certainly in South Africa and in other parts of Africa, believe that fruit juice is really quite healthy. In fact, it's probably worse than carbonated beverages and contains more sugar. A glass of orange juice has 10 teaspoons of sugar, and a 330 ml can of Coke, which I don't know if it still exists, was approximately 8 teaspoons of sugar. Next slide. We also have now looked at what has happened to the health promotion levy in South Africa. Next slide. Next slide. And I just want to show you the baseline study. We've done further studies on how people think about sugary beverages. And I just want to read you one of them. I'll give you one example for my family. If there is no cold drink in that house, everybody goes mad. We buy 5 liters and it must be finished today. 1 glass is not enough. We have to drink that 5 liters until it is finished. Next slide. So that gives you an idea of how people have been thinking about sugar. And I can tell you that it's a long and winding road to explain to the public how bad sugar is for them, because when the tax was introduced on cigarettes, people certainly knew that cigarettes were unhealthy, and I think it's going to take much longer to educate the public about sugar. However, having a sugary beverage tax definitely makes a difference and it sends a strong public health message. I just want to talk briefly about industry. Do I have another 5 minutes?
Yes, 5 minutes.
Okay. And certainly we know that the prices were increased, so the tax was put onto the sugary beverages. There was a lot of reformulation that occurred with both the size, and lots of new products were put on the market by industry, but the biggest decrease in consumption was mostly amongst those who were highest consumers to begin with. Next. And I won't go through all of these, but I just want to show you that you can't do this without thinking about other actors in the system. Who are they? Obviously government, which includes Treasury and health, departments of health, departments of trade and industry will want to have their say. Civil society is really critical. Industry itself is important. As academia, I think we play a very important role in terms of research. And then, of course, there are global actors, both in the research area as well as groups like WHO who have their own views on these things. Next. So the industry has a lot of tactics. I'm not going to go through this, but I just want to say this is one of the views of the sugar industry, quote unquote. Most foods would probably be unacceptable for human consumption if it were not for the addition of sugar. And I can see you all laughing about that. Next slide. So in terms of lessons learned, I just want to say that what we've learned from this experience is it's not just about evidence and showing how many lives we could save from a sugary beverage tax, how many lives we could save from diabetes or obesity, stroke, etc. It's really about the political economy. It's about these other actors in the system. And as I said, confronted with a sales drop in the global north, there's increased marketing to our emerging economies. Some call it coca colonization, and it's very much focused on the poor. Policy making engagement is challenging, but it's very essential. If we have strong advocacy support, it goes a long way. And certainly the tobacco and alcohol industries, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Next slide. Thank you very much. I don't know whether I've got time to answer this question or just to do it in the chat box. Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. La, and to the FERN meeting organizers.